That was one of the things last week as we talked about what do we need to update and keep changing. They said, folders. We want the folders. Beyond that, let's just go ahead and do a little bit of review this morning as if I could get some help passing out some of these papers. Zach, Andrew, can I get your help passing out? We're passing out first week 1 again for anyone who's misplaced theirs or doesn't have theirs. I figured we'd repass that one out. That way we can all have that. And then we're going to have week 2. But just before we get into this week, let's just do some review. Last week we talked about who? Who was the main person we talked about? King Saul. King Saul, exactly. And he was anointed king because the people wanted a king, yes? Yeah. Now, was that a good action or a bad action?
Bad.
It was bad. Exactly, because God was supposed to be their king. And he started out good and he turned bad. And what did we see that was one of Saul's big flaws he had as we looked at him last week? Pride/cowardice, exactly. And there were 3 events that we pointed out.
Yeah, I'm not done. These are last week's.
Yeah.
Still handing them
Yes.
out? Okay.
Yeah.
I am supposed to still hand out.
Yeah. It's so we can all have it. Because I know if I was given a piece of paper, I would lose it. That's just a point of fact. If I'm given a piece of paper and said, hang on to this, I won't remember it. So I figured we'd have last week.
Just ask who doesn't have last week.
Who doesn't have last week's paper and still needs it?
Oh, that's not the same. You said it was, but it's different.
Oh, it's slightly different.
Instead of filling in the blanks, you've got to...
Yeah.
Okay, I got it.
Yeah. Does anyone else need last week's before we keep going? Nope. All right, I'll have extra copies. This is this week's. This one. Yeah. All right, so there were 3 events in Saul's life that kind of showed that he didn't trust God and the reasons that God said, no longer will Saul be king. Does anyone remember what 3 events they were? He didn't slaughter all the Amalekites. That was the final one, yeah. He offered the sacrifice instead of waiting for Samuel like God had said to. And then there was a third one. He didn't kill Jonathan. Exactly. Because as we remember in the battle, he had made a vow before God. Is that all of them?
Did everybody get once? The week 2?
Everyone get a week 2? Yeah. All right. So he didn't kill Jonathan because in the battle he'd made the vow before God saying, nobody will eat until I have my vengeance on the Philistines. And in the middle of the fight, Jonathan took a big bite of honey, and afterwards, he was supposed to kill him, but all the men said, why would we kill Jonathan? He was the one who saved us from the Philistines. And in his fear, he said, okay, I guess we won't. Probably a little bit scared of the men, but then also as a father, didn't really want to kill his son. But he had made his promise, but he found a way out of it. And all of those led to God telling him, all right, I'm picking somebody else. And that's where we're going to pick up this week in 1 Samuel 16. Because as we all know, after Samuel leaves King Saul, he starts to be upset. Because he's like, man, God's anointed king, the people wanted him, and now he's failed. God rejected him, what do I do? God comes to Samuel and says, how long are you going to mourn over the king I've rejected? Go get some oil in your horn and go over to the house of Jesse and anoint one of his sons. So he does, and we all kind of know the process as that goes. He gets there. Jesse starts bringing out all his children before him, and one after another, he says, oh, the oldest son, he's the strongest, the biggest. Surely that's the guy God wants. No, not him. The second son, he comes before him, and they're like, well, he's looks a lot like the first one. Surely this one. No. And it goes and goes and goes until all the sons that are present of Jesse, God says, I'm not choosing any of them. So he says to Jesse, goes, do you have any other children? He's like, yes, the youngest, David, is out in the field. Bring him forward. The moment he's brought before Samuel, God says, that's him. Get up and anoint him with oil. So in front of Jesse and all his brothers, David gets anointed by Samuel to be the next king. And now there's a little bit of an issue, because David is anointed to be the next king, but there's still a current reigning king over Israel. And that's King Saul. And the issue becomes now, what's going to happen to Saul in his life? And if somebody could read for me 1 Samuel 16, verses 14 to 23. Can anyone read that for me? Oh.
Now the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and a harmful spirit from the Lord tormented him. And Saul's servants said to him, behold now, a harmful spirit from God is tormenting you. Let our Lord now command your servants who are before you to seek out a man who is skillful in playing the lyre, and when the harmful spirit from God is upon you, he will play it, and you will be well. So Saul said to his servants, provide for me a man who can play well, and bring him to me. One of the young men answered, behold, I have seen a son of Jesse the Bethlehemite, who is skillful in playing, a man of valor, a man of war, prudent in speech, and a man of good presence, and the Lord is with him. Therefore Saul sent messengers to Jesse and said, send me your son David, who is with the sheep. And Jesse took a donkey laden with bread and a skin of wine and a young goat, and sent them by David, his son, to Saul. And David came to Saul and entered his service. And Saul loved him greatly, and he became his armor bearer. And Saul sent to Jesse, saying, let David remain in my service, for he has found favor in my sight. And whenever the harmful spirit from God was upon Saul, David took the lyre and played it with his hand. So Saul was refreshed and was well, and the harmful spirit departed from him.
Yeah. That's probably the hardest part of preparing for this week, is what do we do right there at the beginning of that? Because like I said, now there's this new king anointed, so the Spirit of the Lord leaves King Saul and falls on to what will become King David. Right now he's not the king. And then it says, an evil spirit from the Lord was sent to torment Saul. And now it gets real confusing, because why would God send an evil spirit to torment Saul? That doesn't seem fair. That doesn't make a lot of sense to how we see things. And as I was looking into that over the course of this week, there are two main ideas, and both of them come to about the same point. The first is that God didn't actually send an evil spirit, but rather, when the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of the Lord, left Saul, it left him open now to spiritual attack, much more than he was before. And, it's what's the point of cleaning the house if one leaves and 7 more come in to ruin it again? Now he's open to that, and an evil spirit possessed him at times. And that's kind of the idea that a lot of us think about, and that's probably the one I agree with the most, is that it wasn't sent by God, rather God allowed it to happen. Much like in the story of Job, whenever God says to the devil, all right, you can attack Job, it's kind of the same here, I believe. The other theory is that it was sent by God as a form of punishment. Because as we know, and even as we looked at last week with the Amalekites, God's form of punishment is pretty severe. With the Amalekites, it was because they are so evil, they're going to keep doing evil, that God says, I need to wipe them all out, as a form of mercy to anyone who would grow up in that society, as well as a form of mercy to the nations around them, that they won't be subject to the evil of this people group. Well, now, Saul, who was supposed to be the great king that God anointed, has turned out to be a dud, and he's disobeyed God continuously. At every turn, he could have done something great. He chose to do something horrible. So now, God has sent this as a form of punishment. But God is not without mercy, which is in that theory. The rest of that is God sent David to play the lyre in front of Saul as a form of mercy to prevent Saul from being overcome by this spiritual oppression. And either way, you get to the same point of that David is sent as a merciful act to help alleviate Saul's torment. And that's what happens, as we see, is every time David would play, the Spirit would leave him. Because through David's playing, he was worshiping the Lord. And as he did that, it made it easier for Saul to bear. So as we go from here, just keep in mind that yes, we don't know exactly what is meant by the evil spirit sent by the Lord. But either way, it's sent because he was in continuous disobedience.
Don't you think that we can apply that to our lives today? Because when we disobey God, we have to pay the consequences.
Kinda, yeah. Yeah, you could in a sense equate that, because this is the consequences of his action. Because we know that, and what we believe is that as you go, continual willful disobedience to God is pretty bad. It leads to bad consequences. And in some cases, as we read in some of the New Testament letters, it's iffy on if continual disobedience leads to you losing your salvation. That's an issue for another time we're not going to talk about now. But it is that idea of his actions were so horrible and continually disobedient that this was the consequences of those actions. And I think in this, God is hoping to bring about a sense of repentance on Saul, but it's ultimately up to Saul's decision if he's going to choose obedience or continue to choose disobedience. Either way, he's going to lose the kingdom, but he might not lose his life. And that's where I think it goes from there. But as we keep going with the story, we turn to probably the most famous story of David in the next chapter, chapter 17, and that is the story of David and Goliath. And this is a fun story we like to tell our kids, but I think sometimes we leave out the last bits that are a little gross. Because as the story goes, David, now in service to Saul, is his armor bearer. So he's with Saul a lot of the time. But now the Philistines, once again, as we'll see throughout the whole story of 1st and 2nd Samuel, the Philistines are the big enemies of Israel in history. And if you look at the map here, you can see Gaza. Well, right there's the Gaza Strip, which still today is a big point of conflict between the nation of Israel and the Palestinians, is in that same area. So I'm not going to get into all that, but there's evidence today that this fight is still happening between these two people groups. But the Philistines once again have come to fight Israel. It says they amassed their army on one hill. King Saul and all the soldiers of Israel, they're on the other hill. And as they're looking out at each other, about to go into battle, the Philistines send forward their champion, a man named Goliath of Gath. And as you look into it, he's about 9 feet 9 inches tall. So he's a tall guy. He's a big guy. It says his armor he wears is about 125 pounds of just the breastplate he's wearing. He's a strong guy. He's big. He's intimidating. And as he gets before the people of Israel, he starts taunting them, saying, "Look, I'm a Philistine. You're the soldiers of Saul. Send forward your champion to fight me. If you win, we will become your servants. If I win, and if I win, you become my servants." That idea of we don't need this whole big battle. We'll just do one guy versus one guy, winner take all type of fight. And this happens, it says, for 40 days. And during this time, David's 3 older brothers, they're in with the army. They're part of the soldiers. And David is now going back and forth from home to there to serve Saul as well as to watch over the flocks of his father. So David's gone now as this is all going on. And this goes about for 40 days while David is back home with the sheep. And finally, Jesse, his father, comes and says, "David, why don't you take this grain, these loaves of bread, these wheels of cheese, take these up to your brothers, give them some food, and just kind of check in, see what's happening." Because it's been a few days now, and the army's still not back, so something must be going on. So David, being a good son, listens to his father. He takes all that up there, and right as he gets there, the armies are getting ready to go to battle again. So all the soldiers start going out into the hillside to get ready to fight, and David's now interested in what's going on. So it says he leaves all the stuff with the keeper of the supplies, and he goes to the battle line where he sees Goliath up there going his same speech again, saying, I'm Goliath, why don't you come fight us? He goes through this whole thing, and it says he starts to curse God and curse the army of Israel. And as this happens, it says David gets a little fired up at it. And I believe it's verse 22 of Samuel 17, where David, he says, he leaves everything with the keeper of the supplies and ran to the battle lines to ask his brothers how they were. And while he was going with them, Goliath, the champion from Gath, stepped out to the lines and shouted his usual defiance. And David heard it. And when all the people heard it, the soldiers, they were terrified and began to run away. And they started saying amongst themselves, the soldiers of Israel started saying, listen, whoever faces down this champion and kills him will get a whole lot of money. They'll get to marry the king's daughter, and their family will be exempt from taxes. So all the soldiers are starting to weigh out the options here. Is it worth fighting the champion? I might die, but those are some pretty good rewards. You get to marry into the king's household and you get exempt from taxes, which, I would do a lot of things if it meant I could be exempt from taxes today. I can't imagine how it was in the feudal times of this. And while all this is going on, David starts to ask the people around him. He asks them a few questions. If somebody could read for me 1 Samuel 17, verses 26 and 27.
David spoke to the man that stood by him, saying, what will be done to the man that kills this Philistine and takes away his reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? And the people answered him in the same way. So will it be done to the man who killed him.
Yeah. So David now heard what he was saying, and I love it what he says, because he says, what will be done to the man who removes this disgrace? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should stand in the way of the army of the living God? So he knows who he serves and knows who they serve, and he's like, who's this guy? Why are we all scared of him? What's going on here? Guys, come on. We're the army of the living God. We can take this guy. So he's starting to get fired up, and he asks the people around him, like, what's going to happen? If somebody were to do this, and they start telling him all these rewards. And now he's like, ooh, that sounds like a good deal. And I love it too, because just after that, it says his older brother hears him saying this, and he starts to get mad. He says, now why are you here? This is the older brother talking to his younger brother, saying, why are you here? You don't need to be here. You're just here to watch the battle. I know in your heart, you're a deceitful person at your heart. You don't care about what's happening to Israel. And I love that, because again, David, the man who has the Spirit of the Lord on him, is being reprimanded by his older brother. And he turns to him and says, can I even speak? Do I get a word here? It's just such an argument between brothers on why are you here, It's a really interesting little thing there. He thought he was just there to watch the battle. Little did he know that his younger brother was going to fight the champion. And all of this conversation gets back to King Saul, and he says, oh, David wants to fight? Well, bring him before me, So he brings David before him. David says, I'm willing to fight this guy for you. And he's like, well, do you want my armor? Here, take my armor, wear it, it'll protect you. Tries it on, says, no, this doesn't feel right. I'm not used to wearing armor like this. I don't need it. And he tells him, he says, as a shepherd, I would protect the flocks from lions and bears. When one would take the sheep, I would chase it down. I would hit it with a rock. I would save it from the mouth. I would grab it by the hair, and I'd kill the lion or bear. And he says, this Philistine is just like those wild animals. That's what he compares him to. He says, this man is just like those beasts. If the God who protected me from the paw of the lion and bear, he'll protect me from the Philistine. So he compares what he's about to fight to some wild animal in the field. Again, it just shows that David just did not like them at all, because they were defying the army of the living God. He was speaking bad about the Lord, and David wasn't about to let that happen. So David goes, and we know the story. He goes and he gets 5 stones. And again, there's a fun little conversation there. Why did David bring 5 stones? The thought is Goliath had 4 brothers. So David thought, well, if I kill Goliath, what if his 4 brothers come over that hill, want to kill me too? I got 1 stone for each of them. he was so confident that God was going to protect him, he was saying, I only need one stone, and I'm going to prepare in case he has family that wants to kill me too. That's one of the thoughts about it, and I think it's probably pretty accurate. David seems like he's confident that God will protect him. So David gets out, he has his sling, and he has a rock in the sling, and he's ready to go to battle. And as he steps out, it says Goliath looks at him and he starts to taunt David, saying, am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? He says, look at me, I'm this big guy, and there's just this little kid that you're going to send out. And he says, today I'm going to kill you and the birds will feast on your flesh. And David turns to him, and he gives pretty much the same speech, saying, no, you got this wrong. The Lord will protect me. I'm going to kill you. Then I'm going to cut off your head, and the birds will eat your flesh. So they go back and forth. And as Goliath charges to fight him, David gets a sling, lets loose the rock, it hits him in the forehead. And Goliath dies to that. It says that Goliath dies to the rock. But David isn't about to just let him die to the rock. So he says he runs out there, and this is the part we don't tell in Sunday school, I think, a lot. Because after David hits him with the rock, David goes, he grabs Goliath's sword, pulls it out of the sheath, and cuts off Goliath's head in front of everybody. Right there, because that's what he said he was going to do. He said, today I'm going to cut off your head, and then the birds are going to eat flesh, because God is with me. And that's what happens. So now, David has defeated Goliath. And all the Philistines are terrified. So they start to run away, and as we read, it says, the armies of Israel, they chase them, and they chase them all the way to Gath, which again, I'll reference our map if you look at, is right there, the first town in the Philistine territory. They chase them all the way back home, killing them as they go. And after this fight ends, it says, David, he takes the head as a trophy, and he goes to put it back with them in Jerusalem. David was proud of killing Goliath, and he wanted to show it off. I love it. It's really gross, but I'm a boy, and I think a lot of us guys can understand that animal instinct of, look at what I've collected. It's like mounting the deer head on the wall, but for this, it's showing that I defeated Goliath. It says David has the head with him, and Saul is confused because he says, now, go figure out everything about where this boy is from. I want to know his family. So whenever Saul brings him back before him, it says David is standing in the presence of Saul with the head of the Philistine, and he says, I'm David, son of Jesse. My family's from Bethlehem. Because now they're tax exempt, because that was the reward. And as this continues, it shows David with the Spirit of the Lord can do great things. And see, these are things Saul could have done had he had trusted God like he was supposed to and obeyed. But in his cowardice, even he was scared of the Philistine. And he was probably scared because he knew the Spirit of the Lord was no longer with him. But that's not where it ends. Because now, David, a proven soldier, starts to take up more and more responsibilities with the army, along with the household of King Saul. Is everyone tracking where we're at? Are there any questions, clarifications needed? Okay, we're going to move on to the next chapter. Because now we start to see David's rise to fame. And it starts right at the beginning. It says, after David finished talking with Saul, he became in one spirit with Jonathan, Saul's oldest son. They became super close friends. They were practically family at that point, So such a close friendship that they were brothers is kind of how it is. So he was close friends with Jonathan, and he started to go along with the armies, marching, taking command, and being a wonderful soldier. And it starts in 18 verses 6 to 16 is where we start to see the turn of David's life and King Saul's life. Does anyone want to read that for me? 1 Samuel 18 verses 6 to 16. Vicky?
But David said to Saul, who am I, and what is my life of my father's family in Israel?
Nope, is that
What?
chapter 18?
Chapter 18.
My bad. Yeah. Chapter 18, verses 6 to 16.
Verse 6.
Yeah.
Done. It happened as they were coming.
Mm-hmm.
When David returned from killing the Philistine, that the women came out of all the cities of
Yeah. So there we see Saul's now starting to change his attitude towards David. It started as good. David would play the harp and Saul would calm down. But now, after the fight with Goliath and other things getting David more famous, he starts to get afraid. It even says, they credit him tens of thousands. What more can he take but the kingdom? Now he starts to get scared, because what if he takes my kingdom away from me? What if he takes what is mine? And it starts to fester inside of him until ultimately he tries to kill him in the middle of the throne room. It says David's playing and he throws the spear to kill him. And from that day forward, he was afraid of him. And again, we see Saul's cowardice. He was afraid because he knew that the Spirit of the Lord was with David, not himself. And it gets almost worse from there. Well, it does get worse, not even almost. It just gets worse. Everything we're going to see now in Saul's life with his relationship with David only gets worse from here on out. Because Saul starts to seek ways to kill him. And in this one, in chapter 18, he starts his first plan. And his plan is, I'm going to offer him one of my daughters, but I'm going to demand that he go kill a whole lot of Philistines, and the Philistines will kill him for me. That was his plan, was to let the Philistines do the dirty work, kind of like with David and Bathsheba's wife. It's very similar concept here, is I'll let my enemies kill him so I don't have to worry about it. But as we go, it says he offers his oldest daughter to David, and David says, well, who am I to take the king's daughter? I'm just a lowly shepherd boy, I'm no one noble, no one of renown, and he refuses to marry the king's oldest daughter, which is kind of crazy in my mind, this idea of when you marry into the king's household, now you're set above everyone else. But he's like, no, I can't do that to you, Saul. Leave her for somebody more prestigious than me. And Saul's like, well, okay, I guess. But now his plan is ruined. So he thinks of another one. He has another daughter that he says, well, I'll offer him her and have the same plan. But before he does it, he makes it seem like his youngest daughter wants to marry him. He says, she really wants to marry you. Do me this favor, marry her. All you have to do is bring me the proof of 100 dead Philistines. And again, this is kind of gross. We don't talk about this in normal children's Sunday school. But the way they would prove that is by bringing the foreskin back, because Philistines were uncircumcised. So he says, bring me the foreskins of 100 Philistines and you can marry her. And David thinks, well, she wants to marry me. She loves me. So, okay, I'll do it. It says David gets together with his men and they go out to fight these Philistines. And not only do they kill 100, it says they kill 200. And they bring back everything he needed, plus they bring back shields and spears and swords. They bring back everything that they got from killing these 200 Philistines, and they lay it before Saul, and now Saul's even angrier, because his plan was to have David die by the hands of these Philistines. But now David not only accomplished the goal, but did it so well that he brought back double what was needed. So he has no excuse but to marry his daughter to him. And this enrages him even more as we read through. David continuously not prides himself, but gets set above everyone else because the Spirit of the Lord is with him. And as he rises in fame, Saul, also popular, starts to get paranoid again and again and again, because what more could David take other than the kingdom? He's already got the love of the people. He's practically he is now brother-in-law to his son, who treats him as though they were kin. And now all that's left is the throne. And Saul does not want to give that up because that's his. So as we go from there, it just gets worse and worse until Saul finally says, fine, I'll do it myself. I'll kill David on my own. So it says at the beginning of chapter 19, it says Saul told his son Jonathan and all the attendants to kill David. But Jonathan has taken a great liking to David and warned him, my father Saul is looking for a chance to kill you. Be on your guard tomorrow. So now it's not just a sly thing. Saul says to everybody, kill David. I want him dead. That's what he gives an order to, but everyone loves David, so they warn him. And it says him and his wife, who was Saul's daughter, they come up with a plan to help David escape to get away from Saul, while also giving him about a day's head start. It says, since he knows Saul was coming to kill him, his wife sent him away in the secrecy of the night, put an idol in their bed and put some goat's fur on top to make it look like somebody was sleeping there. Kind of like how teenagers do to escape the house, you know? They put a pillow under the bed. That's essentially what their plan was. So then the next day, the guards come to arrest David. They knock on the door. His wife answers, says, he's really sick. Leave him alone. He's in bed. He hasn't felt well. They look in. They see, oh, somebody's laying in bed. So then they go back to Saul and say, he was sick. Your daughter wouldn't let us in to see him. And that makes Saul even more mad. Again, Saul wants David dead. So he says, I don't care. Bring him before me. And they go back to the house. They knock on the door. They say, all right, we're coming in to get him, even though he's sick. And they realize he's not there anymore. And now Saul's even more angry because he finds out that somebody had tipped David off that I'm coming to kill him. So Saul starts this big, long search. It goes on for a while. And Jonathan, wanting to save David, comes to his father and says, hey, why are we trying to kill David? Hasn't he done great things for the kingdom? Hasn't he fought our enemies? Hasn't he done? So it's kind of listing off these good things he's done to get Saul to realize, oh, you're right. David's one of my top generals, one of my right-hand men. Why would I want to kill him? So Saul says, no, okay, I promise you, no harm will come to David. Just get him home. So finally, Jonathan's like, yes, he's safe. So they bring David back to court, and wouldn't you believe it, it's like a day later, David again is playing the harp before Saul. Saul gets mad and throws a spear at him again and says, I want to kill him still. So Saul here just keeps flip-flopping back and forth because he wants David dead to save his kingdom. And as this goes, David eventually goes on the run and doesn't know exactly what Saul's intentions are. Because King Saul has said, I'm going to kill him. I don't want to kill him. I'm going to kill him. No, I don't want to kill him. No one of those going back and forth. So before David finally decides, I'm going to leave Jerusalem, or Gilead, I don't think they're in Jerusalem, my bad. He says, I need to know if Saul really wants me dead. And that's what we see the plan start to get hatched in chapter 20 with David and Jonathan. Again, this is a story we're similarly familiar with, where David doesn't know if he should leave or if he should stay. Jonathan wants him to stay because they're brothers, but David says, I think I should leave. So they come up with a plan. They say, there's the festival coming up. Why don't you say you went home for the festival to sacrifice with your family, and instead go hide in the field. I'll find out if my father wants to kill you or not. If he does, I'll shoot an arrow, and I'll tell the servant to go collect it, but it's farther out. If he doesn't, I'll shoot the arrow out into the field where you're hiding, and I'll tell the servant, well, it's just right there next to you. It's kind of their secret signals on, do you need to flee, or can you stay? So they put their plan into effect. David hides out in one of Saul's fields. He's hiding behind a rock or on the ground, wherever he's hiding. And then the festival happens, and it's feast. It's a few days of feasting. So on the first day, Saul gets together his whole family. Jonathan's there. The officials are there. But there's an open seat at the table where David would be. And now Saul's like, man, where's David? So he asks Jonathan. He says, Jonathan, where is David? He says, oh, he went home for the festival to sacrifice with his family. He should be back later. He's like, okay, I guess that's all right. And then the next day, the same kind of thing happens. They get together for the feast in the evening. David still isn't there. And he gets mad now because he had planned to kill David at the table in the front of everyone, really, is what his plan was. Is I knew David would be here, so I'm going to kill him. That was Saul's plan. And so he asked Jonathan again. He says, why did you lie to me? This time he gets mad at Jonathan. He says, are you helping him escape? He starts to yell at Jonathan. And I honestly forgot about this part, but it says he picks up a spear and goes to kill his son Jonathan at the table for betraying him to David. That's how deranged Saul was at this point. He threw a spear at his own son because his son was helping David. And that's how much he hated David and how scared he was that David was going to take over the kingdom. Because in his yelling, he tells his son, don't you understand that if he survives, you'll never become king? Saul knew his family was not going to be in line to be king anymore. And he knew, because of the Spirit of the Lord upon him, that David was going to be the next king. So he was trying to secure his family line as the kings of Israel by killing David. But Jonathan didn't care about that, because he loved David like a brother and knew that the Spirit of the Lord was with him, and he needs to survive. So Jonathan goes out, and he shoots the arrow, and he tells the servant, it's far past you. And David now knows he has to go on the run. And this is going to be the rest of 1 Samuel, are stories of David on the run and Saul trying to chase him down and kill him. The first one we see is at 1 Samuel chapter 21, where David goes to a town of priests. It's the town called Nob. If somebody wouldn't mind reading for me 1 Samuel 21, verses 1 through 9. Preston?
David went to the
Mm-hmm.
So he said to him, why are you alone? No one is with you. David answered, no. He gave me a vision, and so we don't let anyone know anything about it. I'm telling you for what I have wanted you to do. I have taken my young man from the second place. Now, what do you have on him? Give me 5 loaves of bread, or whatever can be done. He told him, there is no ordinary bread on him. However, there is consecrated bread that the young man may eat, only that they have kept themselves from woman. David answered him, I said that woman is being kept from us, but always when I go out to battle. The young man's body was consecrated, even on an ordinary mission. So of course their bodies are consecrated bread. So the priest gave him the consecrated bread, so there was no bread there except the bread of the presence that had been removed from the presence of the Lord, the bread that refused that had been replaced with bread.
Yep. Yeah. So David on the run breaks one of the big laws of the time, and he gets the consecrated bread that was set aside for priests only. Now, if we want, matter of fact, I'd like if somebody could flip to Matthew chapter 12, verses 1 through 8, and we'll see how this story, knowing everything around this, connects to stuff that happens in the New Testament when Jesus is speaking.
1 through 8.
Yeah, 1 through 8 there, the opening of Matthew 12.
At that time, Jesus went to the grain fields on the Sabbath, and his disciples were hungry and began to pick the heads of grain into eat. So when the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, look, your disciples are doing that which is not lawful to do on the Sabbath. But he said to them, have you not read what David and those who were with him did when he was hungry? How he entered the house of God and ate the ritual bread which was not lawful for him to eat, neither for those who were with him, but only for the priests? Or have you not read in the law how the Sabbath the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath, but are blameless? I say to you, in this place there is one who is greater than the temple. If you had known what this meant, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent. The Son of Man is Lord even on the Sabbath.
See, right there. This story we're reading about now is what Jesus mentions whenever he's confronted about his people doing that, what is unlawful on the Sabbath. Is he goes back to this story, because it was unlawful for David to eat this bread. But the priests, they knew David, and they said, have your men kept from women? Yes. Okay, you can take it, because it was a desperate need. Again, mercy over ritualistic sacrifice and laws and traditions. Again, this is just neat to see. Knowing some of these Old Testament stories help us give context for what we read in the New Testament, because it's all one story continuously leading up to Jesus from the Old Testament to New Testament. But as David said, he needed the bread, so they gave him the bread. And as it goes from there, it does mention that one of Saul's servants, an Edomite, who was Saul's chief shepherd, was in that same area. So now we got a servant of Saul seeing David, who he wants to kill, at a town of priests. This is not going to be something good. We're going to see how this comes back later. But as it goes from there, David, again, he asks something else. He says, don't you have a spear or a sword? I don't have any of my weapons. He left in such a hurry that he was like, I don't have anything to fight with. Do you have any sort of weapons here at your town? And it's hilarious, too, because I'm not quite sure how it got there, but he says, we have the sword of Goliath the Philistine who you killed here. Do you want that? He's like, yeah, give me that sword. I don't know how it got there, because it must have just been passed around, I guess, eventually landed here at this priestly town. But the sword of Goliath was sitting in this town, so that's what David takes from there as a weapon to fight his enemies with. And as it goes, they continue on the run, and it's, again, David doing some sketchy stuff here. It says he leaves that town of Nob and goes down to Gath. Now remember, Gath is a Philistine town in Philistine territory. And David, seeking to save himself from Saul, goes there. And it's hilarious because while he's there, it says the king of Gath sees this and he says, isn't this David, king of the land? Isn't he the one they sing and dance about where they say, Saul has killed his thousands and David his tens of thousands? So even the king of Gath realizes, this is David. Isn't he that really popular Israelite guy? Matter of fact, isn't he the guy who killed Goliath, who lived in our town because Goliath was from Gath? He says, what is he doing here? And now David's scared because he's like, well, shoot, if he wants to kill me, he can. So he pretends to be insane. That's David's defense here. He pleads insanity in front of this guy. It says he starts to babble and let drool slide down his beard to look insane so he can get asylum in this town for a few days. So he stays there a while he's there. It says whenever the king sees this, he says, the guy is insane. Why did you bring him before me? So David pleaded insanity to get into the town, and everyone recognized him here, and they brought him before the king, and the king says, he's insane. Why did you bring him here? Get him away. Do I need another insane person in my court? I want him out of here. Send him on his way, So David, he tried to seek asylum there. He didn't find it. Instead, he gets sent away from Gath, and as he is on the run again, he again flees outside of Israel for somewhere of safety, because he knows all of Israel now is searching for him because King Saul has ordered him to die. So as he's on the run, it says they leave Gath and they escape to the caves of Adullam, which is in Israel. They escape there and they hide there. And while they're hiding there, it says all of his people that are discontent with everything, his soldiers that fought with him, the people who are on his side, all gather together there around him in the cave, and he's got about 400 people with him now. And now they don't know what to do next. So again, looking for somewhere safe, David takes his family with him, and they go to the town of the people of Moab, which again, if you look on your map, they're on the other side of the Dead Sea there, above Edom, is Moab. They flee to a stronghold in Moab, where David leaves his family with the safety of that king there, saying, keep them safe, because if the king is searching to kill me, David, surely he would also kill all of my family too. So he gets them safe in Moab, and the Lord comes upon him in a prophet who comes to him and says, you got to go back to Israel. You can't stay here. You need to leave this town and go back home. So David leaves his family there, takes his soldiers with him, and they return into the nation of Israel and continue to hide out, avoiding Saul. But while all of this is happening, Saul gets word from an Edomite, who is his chief shepherd, that David was at the town of Nob talking to the priests. And now Saul is about to go exact his vengeance on these people who helped David. Because as this is happening, David's on the run. Saul's tracking him down, trying to find out wherever he went. He finds out he's there. He goes under a tree, gathers together all his court and all his officials, and they go and they get all the priests of Nob. They bring him out before King Saul, and Saul says, "Why have you done this wicked thing? Why have you helped David even though I'm trying to stop him? You traitors," is what he calls them. He calls these priests traitors, and they respond, they say, "Listen, we didn't know what was going on. How many times have I talked to the Lord on behalf of your servant David? You know, I didn't realize everything that was happening," which may have been true, but probably was a lie. He knew David was on the run, but they knew that the Lord was with them. So they tried to tell Saul, "Listen, we thought we were just helping one of your servants. We didn't know all this was happening." But Saul doesn't care. Because as we've seen with Saul, he's a coward, and he's also impulsive and kind of crazy now. He just wants to kill David, and he'll kill anyone who helps David. Because he says to his soldiers that are standing there, he says, "Kill these priests." That's what he orders his soldiers to do, is to kill the priests that help David. And I love it too, because all the soldiers say, "No, we're not going to do this." That's the line. Because he says, "Kill the priests of the Lord who helped the traitor David." That's what he tells them to do. And soldiers won't do it because they're the holy men of God. They're Levites. They're priests. They're our people. We're not going to kill them. So then Saul's angry at all the soldiers. He turns to the Edomite, who, again, if you look at your map, there's the nation of Edom. That's one of the people groups that in the past have attacked the Israelites on many occasions. Yet there's this Edomite man here who's serving Saul. So he turns to him and says, "Why don't you kill these priests?" And that man, without a second guessing, pulls out a sword and starts to kill the priests in front of them. And it goes so far that not only does Saul order the death of the priests, he also orders the entire destruction of their town. So it says this Edomite man goes, and he wipes out the whole town. It says he kills the priests, he kills the women, the children, their cattle, their sheep. He does, ironically, what the Lord ordered him to do to the Amalekites, he does to the priests at Nob. Further showing that Saul, at every turn, continuously disobeyed God's orders, God's wants. He could never get it right. And it was because of his cowardice and pride that led him down this road that leads to his death at the very end. That's where we're going to stop this week, with that destruction of that town. And next week we're going to see David on the run. We'll see at times where David, again, knowing Saul was trying to kill him, shows that he is a good person at heart, even though he makes mistakes, because he avoids killing King Saul on multiple occasions. We're going to see those next week. And as we continue this, we'll probably also be getting to the end of 1 Samuel next week, that ends with the death of Saul and Jonathan, his son, to start the new kingship of King David. So before I dismiss us with some prayer, are there any questions or thoughts?
Didn't it say, like, whoever killed Goliath would get the money and marry Saul's daughter and, like...
Yeah.
So, but did Saul not honor that then? Because then it's later he says, like, "Oh, if you bring me horsemen, marry my daughter."
Kinda, yeah.
Did he marry another daughter?
It's not exactly clear, but I think a lot of that, yeah, Saul didn't necessarily honor everything, but also how much of it was the people talking versus what was actually said. 'Cause he gets the name of the family of David to exempt them from taxes, and David does get money, but I think Saul did kind of change the deal in a sense. Instead of giving him the daughter, he gave him the daughter with extra steps. He had to do these extra things. And I think some of that is Saul's own ego, kinda. I think he did change the deal afterwards. Because, You can change, as king, you can kind of do what you want. You don't really have to listen. Who's going to tell you otherwise? That's a lot of Saul's philosophy, I think, in his kingship. Is at this point, I'm king, I do what I want. I don't have to listen to you. Anything else? It was Nob.
I was looking it up. I think it's right. It's a mile north of.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It became what Shiloh was during like the time of Judges, and then Shiloh was destroyed, and now it became like
Their capital. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was wondering that.
Yeah. Nob is where they moved the tabernacle, I believe, right? Yeah. So, yeah, right near Jerusalem. It's not on our map. I don't think it was big enough. It's not.
It was to be a dynasty above Jerusalem, below that mountain.
Anathoth, yeah. So between Jerusalem and Anathoth.
It doesn't say why Saul gave his first daughter to somebody else that he promised David, does it?
David refused to marry his first daughter. That was David's whole thing, was when Saul said, marry my oldest daughter. His plan was to do what he did to his, require all these things. But David said, I'm not worthy enough to marry a king's daughter. I'm just a shepherd boy. That's kind of his thing was, as a king, you would marry your daughters to other political powers as forms of alliances or truces, as a way to say, like, listen, you tell a king of another nation or someone else prominent, you marry my daughter, because then neither side will want to attack each other. Because the daughter won't want her husband to attack her father, and the father won't want to attack the daughter's people. It's that way of political alliance. So that was what the daughters are usually used for in this time period.
They didn't have much value.
Not really, no. We can talk about other historical uses. I watched a video and it talked about Attila the Hun married off his daughters to all these other chiefs, and then the chiefs would come to work for him. They would die in battle, and then his daughter would become chiefess of that people group. So that's how he used his daughters, again, political appointees to make alliances. Interesting. It's historical, and I love history. I could talk all day about history, but we don't have all day. Anything else? If not, I can go ahead and close this with some prayer. All right. Dear God, we thank you for this morning that we're able to just get together here and look at your word and see how your story from the Old Testament flows right up into the New Testament and even to today. Thank you so much for everything you've done for us this week. Be with us. Heal any sick and injuries we've got. There's always things bad happening. Be with us during those, and we thank you for the good times we have. In your name I pray, amen.